This is it. The final lecture of the course. Bio 101, Bio 102 are done after this. And so are humans. So we're going to talk about global ecology and conservation a little bit more, describing the historical and recent growth of the human population. And just to reiterate, we're all going to die. Across the board, the Earth's going to go on. That's the good news. Life will keep going on, but probably not us. So it's not a happy ending to the story. I wish I could end the course on something a little bit higher note, but the thing is, things have been going downhill pretty quick. Humans are rapidly changing the planet. The atmosphere is changing, the oceans are changing, the soil chemistry is changing. Everything that can be changed is being changed, and it's being changed by us. Humans have a nasty habit of moving nutrients to places they shouldn't go. Human activity moves nutrients from one area and puts it in another. Let's talk about how we do this just a little bit. What should happen normally is carbon dioxide is fixed by plants. Animals that live in a certain region around that plant eat the plant. Those animals excrete and die. When they die, that carbon dioxide is released back to the atmosphere around where that plant was. It was a very close system. But humans changed all that. We move, and we move a lot. Now, plants fix carbon dioxide, consumers eat the plants, and then we move. And we might not move a mile, 2 miles. We might move many, many miles. Heck, we moved the plants from where we planted them to our house, where there's a systematic movement of nutrients all over the country. You urinate. You need to. If you don't, you die. And when you do that, you release ammonia. Well, that ammonia is certainly not coming from where the plants were. It's not going back to where the plants were. It's going to where your house is. Well, then what do? We set up these very complex systems to route it all to one place, to get it all very highly concentrated. Ammonia breaks down into nitrates. Those nitrates are then released to the atmosphere through denitrification. You get nitrogen out there. You've got these complex systems, and we keep moving all the parts of the system from one place to another. When we eat, we move nutrients from the soil to our bodies and eventually into a body of water when we excrete. I know, you go to the toilet. Where do you think it goes after that? It ultimately will end up back in the environment, and definitely not in the environment where it started. We, in our infinite wisdom, have removed nitrogen from soils. We plant food crops. When we plant those food crops take in nitrogen from the bacteria surrounding them, from the soil. And then what should happen is organisms in that same region take in that nitrogen, and that nitrogen gets released to the same region, creating a cycle. But instead, because we grow all of our food in one area and move it somewhere else, where it's then excreted, the nitrogen moves from the fields closer to, in most cases, bodies of water where humans live. So now we need to put nitrogen back into the soil that we've taken it out of. We do that with fertilizer. We might grow more peanuts in there if we want to be sustainable, but even though we're adding nitrogen back to the soil in the field, we have an excess of nitrogen now near where our population centers are. We've unbalanced the system. When nutrient levels move beyond a critical level that can safely be absorbed by plants, like where you live, it reaches what's known as a critical load. Typically, plants can absorb nutrients. They do this very efficiently. Heck, plants can absorb radiation out of soil. Plants are really good for cleaning up soil, but they can only do so much. It will reach what's known as its critical load. It cannot safely pull those nutrients out anymore. This will lead to a buildup of nutrients in the soil that can contaminate other regions and ultimately lead to species destruction. Not everything can support or can survive on an increased nutrient load. Probably the most visible example of this are algal blooms. Water runs off of farmland that's been overly nitrified, that's been overly fertilized, and that water ends up pooling. In the water, now you have a lot of nitrates that help plants grow. That provides fuel, and in sewage provides fuel for phytoplankton to grow, this green algae. And that phytoplankton will grow all over the body of water, leading to it being undrinkable. It's not potable anymore. You can't even use it for your animals. Algal blooms are dangerous to the environment because let's think about how plants work for a second. Plants have two distinct structures in them, mitochondria and chloroplasts. My 101s don't seem to understand that. They think incorrectly that mitochondria are in animals and chloroplasts are in plants, and that is completely and totally factually incorrect. Luckily, you guys know the difference, and if you didn't before, you better know it now. Plants have both mitochondria and chloroplasts, and they're related to each other. Plants are going to take in sunlight, and like you guys know from Bio 101, and from our unit on plants, and from 1,000 other things, plants take in sunlight, they absorb carbon dioxide, they fix carbon dioxide, and water, and they produce waste product of oxygen and glucose. So far, so good. But what you may not recall is that in the evenings, when the sun is not present, the photosystems stop. When the photosystems stop, oxygen is no longer being produced. The plant still needs to live, so it uses that glucose to produce that glucose in aerobic cellular respiration to produce ATP. Don't forget, aerobic cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide. It breaks down glucose. It produces water. So at night, algal blooms remove oxygen from the oceans. They remove oxygen from water. And what needs oxygen in the oceans to survive? Pretty much freaking everything except for anaerobic bacteria. So when you have algal blooms in the oceans, you see what are known as dead zones. Dead zones are areas where no aerobic organism can survive. Only anaerobic organisms can live here, so you don't see multicellular life. There are dead zones frequently found at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Fish don't live there because of the nitrogen runoff and the algal blooms. Humans go even one step farther, though. We don't just send nitrogen into the water, we send toxins into the seas. Lots of toxins. This is an example of a sewage pit. And this sewage pit, it's right next to the ocean. Literally, you can walk you can spit almost and hit the ocean from that sewage pit. You can bet that during storms and during high tide, these sewage pits are going to be overrun with water, flushing all of those toxins that are present out into the seas. Those toxins are going to be taken in by organisms at the lower trophic levels and stored often in their fat. So as lake water becomes toxic, fish take in the toxins. They're eating plants, they're eating microorganisms that are taking the toxins, and those toxins get increased in levels in the fish. As you get higher levels of organisms, they're going to eat the fish that have high levels, which are going to skyrocket their levels of toxins in their fats. The higher level up the food chain you go, the more those organisms are likely to eat other organisms that are contaminated by toxins at high levels. And who do you think is the freaking top of the food chain? Humans. This process is known as biomagnification. As organisms are eaten by other organisms, toxin levels build up to higher and higher levels. You have algae first absorbing, let's say, mercury. As the algae absorbs mercury, zooplankton, the next level on the trophic chain, eats the algae, which concentrates the mercury in the zooplankton. The zooplankton themselves get eaten by small fish, concentrating the toxins in the muscles. In the fat of the small fish. Small fish get eaten by larger fish, further concentrating the toxins. And then finally, humans take it in. We are eating a lot of things, a lot of products that themselves are contaminated by our own industrial waste because we're not the smartest species on the planet. We think we are. We know just enough to hurt ourselves. So that's just how we're systematically poisoning ourselves, but it has nothing to do with how we're utterly changing the climate of the planet. The climate is changing. I know. People want to argue about that. People want to say, but there's a scientist out there who disagrees. Yeah, there might be one. But the 97% of scientists surveyed who've actually do climate studies, they actually do believe that climate change is occurring and climate change is impacted by human activities. There's a lot of data out there, people. Go and research it yourself if you don't understand, but don't go from blog to blog to blog. Actually look at peer-reviewed data. Climate change is caused by an increase in greenhouse gases. There's no disputing that. The end. Greenhouse gases are gases like carbon dioxide and methane. What happens is energy comes in from the sun. That energy is kinetic energy. It's going to strike the earth, and then it can be absorbed. Some of the energy will be absorbed, some will be reflected, but it's going to be reflected as what's called infrared radiation. That infrared radiation sometimes can go right through the atmosphere and leave. If there's a carbon dioxide present, some of that infrared radiation gets absorbed by the carbon dioxide and reflected back to the earth. Methane reflects even more of that energy back to the earth. So we're not letting the sun's energy escape. It creates a greenhouse effect. This causes a steady increase in temperature. If an organism cannot disperse over a long distance, it will not survive rapid climate change. For instance, trees in the last ice age were able to advance or retreat in front of the glaciers. And they did that because the glaciers moved very slowly. So even though they're dispersing a short distance, they're still dispersing. However, we're changing the climate at a rate hundreds of times faster than the last ice age. Organisms are going to need to move toward the poles to survive. Those that are at the poles, those that are already adapted to very cold weather, will not survive. They're just gone. This is known as a mass polar migration. We're also going to start seeing changing weather patterns, and we're already seeing some of this. There is strong evidence that severe droughts, extreme rain events, coastal flooding, and heat waves are caused by human-caused climate change. Slightly less evidence shows that hurricanes and tornadoes are caused by human-caused climate change, but there is still some evidence. There's those strong evidence that heat waves, droughts, extreme rain events, and coastal flooding are caused by climate change. You may have noticed in your lifetime the whole concept of winter is almost going away. The truth is we have two seasons, really. A cool, wet season and a hot, dry season. Hey, remember last time you went sledding? Because it must have been years and years ago for me. Climate change has not just an effect on the land organisms, but also on the water. ocean temperatures are rising. As carbon dioxide levels increase, more water becomes carbonic acid, leading to a decreased pH. Decreased pH mean that organisms that depend on pH can't survive. Shellfish aren't able to develop shells. Corals can't develop. Sea levels will rise, and as sea levels rise, what are currently the coastal regions become more and more submerged, and organisms won't be able to survive that change. Most concerning are the ideas that ocean currents can change. The ocean currents are conveyor belts that allow for climates on the coast to remain stable. If ocean currents change, we're going to see severe changes in land weather patterns. And we can expect to see more extreme weather events. So we're messing things up, and we just know that. The human population is growing exponentially. You know what? No, it used to grow exponentially. It's not growing exponentially anymore. We're leveling off, but it is still increasing rapidly. This is a graph of the world population in billions. 12,000 years ago, there were far less than 1 million people. Heck, about 2,000 years ago, there were a fraction of a billion. Today, there are 7 billion people on the planet, each of which needs resources to survive. In America, the population growth began to decline in the 1960s, and this was probably due to disease as well as voluntary population controls. The birth control pill became a huge game changer. Industrialized nations are near equilibrium, or what's known as replacement. The more developed you are, the more likely you are to maintain your population or decrease your population rather than increase populations. Some countries, Canada, Germany, England, and Japan, are actually decreasing in population size. They are very encouraging of immigration. Well, they used to be very encouraging of immigration because their populations were declining so rapidly. There is still population growth in less industrialized nations as death rates decline. These less industrialized nations are getting access to more modern medical equipment, more modern hospitals, more modern techniques, leading to more people surviving than otherwise would. So if you have a large family, you continue to have a large family. Populations increase. That value, though, should stabilize as reproductive controls and medicine becomes more accepted in the region. We see the same trend over and over and over again. Large family sizes, industrialization, and then smaller family sizes. So, the numbers based on today, we expect about 8.1 to 10.6 billion people to exist on Earth in 2050. You can see a graph here, it's leveling out. You're hitting that plateau. The problem is, as we talked about before, carrying capacity. The global carrying capacity ranges from 1 billion to 1,000 billion. So, huge range there from 1 billion to 1,000 billion people. Most estimates, though, average about 10 to 15 billion people. So we have a carrying capacity of about 10 to 15 billion people. And we expect more than that. We expect roughly 8 to 10 billion people to be on the planet in 2050. We might be able to stabilize. We might be able to exist at the carrying capacity, but we are right skirting that carrying capacity line if we're not going to be over it. And these are just projections. It could be far worse. And the reason it could be far worse is because the global carrying capacity estimates do not include crop loss due to climate change. We may not have enough food to feed people. We are losing crops year by year by year to climate change. I know people want to debate, does it exist? We know that crop values are being reduced. In order to increase carrying capacity, then we need to increase the amount of crops we're able to produce in the same area in worse conditions. We are really close to our carrying capacity. Reproduction currently outpaces resource acquisition. We need food. We need resources. We need land. And without those things, we'll die as a species. I wish there was a better end of the story. I really do. I don't see a way to get around this with our current culture. We want to exploit. We want to take it. We want to get more and more resources. We want to find them. But as we do that, we make it harder and harder and harder for the Earth to replace those resources we're taking out of it. Now, we do have some options, but they're options that people tend to want to discount. Genetic modification, not of our cells, but of our food. If we can genetically modify food so that it's easier to harvest, we can create a better crop, a more efficient crop, in a smaller amount of land or with the current resources and feed more people. But to do that, we need to accept the notion that genetically modified foods aren't harmful to you, which all the evidence says is the case. So I guess that's the end. Right there. There's the end of the lecture. There's the end of the course. Human civilization is right at that very edge. We're right at our carrying capacity. We're following the exact trend lines of extinction if we don't change what we're doing. So there they go. No, I can't end like that. I can't end with, there you go, we're all going to die. So, yes, we're all going to die. Yes, eventually you personally, the person listening to this video, will be dead. There will be nothing left of you. You'll be part of the soil. You'll be denitrified. Cycle will repeat. We, as a culture, have a chance to change this, but it's going to require a lot of sacrifice, and it's going to require us to acknowledge that there is a problem and we can do something about it. Not only can we do something about it, but that we each, on an individual and cultural, social level, contribute to the change. We can't be motivated by purely economic satisfaction. We need to include sustainability in all of our business practices and all of our planning. Then maybe we got a shot. If we don't change our ways, though, it's over. Just like the class. So, thank you very much for listening.